He may have only had a third grade education, but he had a PhD in the war in how to see things and work through things and to be to street smart. He did have an incredible work ethic, though. I love going to his house, and he would always. He showed up. He had to show you the garden, and we went out to the garden, and he was particularly proud of his collards and his sweet taters, and maybe it was just that one year, but he was. Every time I went there in the summer, he had to show me how his beets were doing. He was really particular about his beets, and he laughed at me. He said, "Do you raise beets?" And I raise a garden too. And I said, "No, Mr. Will, I'm too lazy. There's too many weeds, too much trouble for beets for me. I go to Fred's Club and buy them in a can." And he laughed. He said, "Oh, you got to pull the weed." He made a little fun of me for taking the cheap way out and going and buying somebody else's beets. But he loved his garden, and he'd show it off to you. And I mentioned it before. I don't know how many sips out of a metal dipper I shared with that man from the pump house, and those are good moments, and those are good memories. And I mentioned that dipper to the family, and they were like, "Oh yeah, yeah." Everybody. I don't know if y'all ever shared water out of that dipper or not, but what a good memory. He raised chickens every year. Last group he had about 100 chickens, and he was telling me how everything was going with that, and I shared this with the family. I got to share it with y'all. So he comes to church one Sunday morning, and he's all excited. After church, he's heading home. He's going to have dinner, and he's all excited. He said, "I got a chicken in the oven." "Oh, that's good, Mr. Will." He said, "I like chicken." "I do too." He said, "I like peanut butter too." "Well, I like peanut butter too, Mr. Will." He said, "I took that chicken, I smeared the whole thing with peanut butter, and I put it in the oven to roast it. I'm going to see how that does." And everybody here does not get, everybody here, yeah, I can see him trying that. I asked him how it went, and he said, "Well, the peanut butter burnt, but it was still pretty good." Raised chickens every year. He knew how to make sorghum, molasses. That's the only thing I never got any of his sorghum. Hog killings, selling sweet potatoes out of the truck. These are all things that we see his work ethic, and we see how he loved to work, and it doesn't surprise us. That's just the way Mr. Will was. I also know that Mr. Will had a love for people. And again, this is a love that's shaped by faith. 1 Peter 4 says this: "At the end of all things, there be self-controlled, sober-minded, for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers over a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling." And that sounds like Mr. Will, doesn't it? Again, how many times I've never seen him not smile. I've never seen him not grin. Now I know family, y'all see other sides of folks, but for the most part, even last night, everybody going through the line talking about that smile of his and how patient he was and how much he liked to talk. Oh my word, he liked to talk. I think the worst part about at the end with Mr. Will's declining health, the worst part about it is he had so much to tell everybody and he couldn't do it. He was frustrated that his voice was gone. And last time I was with him, he thought his voice was coming back, and I didn't correct him on it. I wanted him to think that. And the last thing he whispered to me that I could make out was, "How's everybody at the crossroads?" He wanted to know about other people. He wanted to talk. He wanted to share. And he would talk forever. And that's a good thing. I like that. He had a love for people. Laugh and smile. Be long remembered. I love it. We walk into his room, and he would say something to the effect of, "Find a place to sit down. Sit down for a while." He didn't want you standing there talking to him. He wanted you to sit down. And if Lucy was with me, he'd make her sit in a good chair, and I had to sit on the walker. But he would make everybody sit down and talk. He and I have watched Daniel Boone get out of many a scrape in that room. That was about the time of the day I was always there. That we had to make sure Daniel Boone came out on the other end pretty good. Every now and then we pick up Bonanza. He loved people and he loved to share life, and I like that about Mr. Will. I love that he asked me. It's almost like he lived vicariously for others that did things like he liked. And he would ask me how my garden was doing. He would ask me how the cannon was going, and he would ask me about this, that, and the other. And one thing, I raised bees, and he never raised bees. And that fascinated him. He said, that was one thing I never did. I believe it was probably the only thing he never did. He wanted to know how the bees were doing and how they did this and how they did that. And he told me the same story I don't know how many times about how he and some other Some other person cut down a tree that had honey in it, a honey tree, busted that thing open, and it was blue honey, full of blue honey, and scared them to death. And they threw every bit of it in the ditch. And that broke my heart. There ain't nothing real special about blue honey other than it's rare, and you can get about 4 times as much as regular honey as you can with that. And it broke my heart. He said, we threw away 2 wash tubs out of that thing. Oh. Mr. Will also recognized that God was in control, and he was responsible for all the good things in Mr. Will's life. He knew that. And that's shaped by his faith. He accepted the Lord at 14, he told me, and was baptized in the St. Mary Creek, right down from the church. I was told by the family that when Patricia started coming around, she was going to go to church, and he said, well, if you go to Crossroads, I'll go with you. And he and his wife, Patricia, and some others started going to Christian Chapel there. And, oh yeah, I'm going to go ahead and tell it on you, Roy. And I was told that Roy very quickly started going with them to church, because he said, I figured I was going to hear that sermon anyway, so I might as well hear it firsthand. He always asked how things were at Crossroads. He wanted to know how people were doing. He wanted to know how the church was going. He wanted to know how things were happening there. And Mr. Will always struck me as somebody from my father's generation, as somebody that I admired. And I know you admired him. And I know our lives are made better because of Mr. Will's involvement in it. And I know that we have good memories to go with us. And I would like to share a poem that I read at my father's funeral. It's called An Admirable Man. If a man is honest with others and with himself, if he receives gratefully and gives quietly, if he is gentle enough to feel and strong enough to show his feelings, if he's slow to see the faults of others but quick to discover their goodness, if he is cheerful in difficult times and modest in success, if he does his best to be true to his beliefs, then he is truly an admirable man. And I would say that from what I knew of Mr. Will Leggett, he was truly an admirable man. The thing is, I've shared with you how our lives are shaped by our faith. And the thing is, for those of us in Christ, yeah, our daily lives are shaped by our faith. His teachings, Christ's commands, Christ's examples. Mr. Will knew that. But what he would want you to know, if you don't know it already, is that that's only found in Jesus Christ. As a sinner, Jesus Christ is the only way to have those sins removed. And Jesus Christ is the only way to an eternity with Christ in heaven. See, that's the other part of our faith. That's the other part of our life in Christ. There's our eternity. And as much fun and as much enjoyment that this earth can be, it is not but a drop in the bucket of the expanse of eternity. We are saddened by the earthly separation that death brings, but we are absolutely expectant of a glorious eternal home for those in Christ. 1 Thessalonians, we do not grieve as those who have no hope. We do not grieve as those who have no hope. We know what faith brings. We know that there's an eternity with God. We know for those in Christ, there's an eternal abode in heaven. As the Bible tells us in Corinthians, to be away from the body means that we're home with the Lord. And today we are absolutely saddened to say goodbye to Mr. Will's body, but we also know that in Christ, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And I want you to know that that's good stuff right there. And that is our hope. That is our hope. If you'll look on the back of your bulletin, you'll see 2 verses. The first and the last verse of Amazing Grace. And that's the key to our hope. That's the key to all of our hope.